too often we close that down because it makes us uncomfortable to get information or to learn something we didn't know. Get comfortable with realizing you don't know everything is the best advice I can give to any young business entrepreneur nowadays. Be comfortable with not knowing, because actually in the not knowing, you're going to get better at what you do need to know, but you don't yet. And just get comfortable with not knowing.
Be humble enough to admit it as well.
Yeah, we don't like to be in the zone of uncertainty, as it were. We like to be constantly knowing things.
Welcome to Playing with Perspective, the suspended animation podcast, where we hear real stories from real people and we tackle all sorts of fun topics in the areas of business, marketing, entrepreneurship, mindset, the arts, and, well, life itself. It's amazing what you'll pick up. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back, everyone. Another great episode of Playing with Perspective, the suspended animation podcast. Darren Saul here, your host in Sydney. It's episode 243, and I've got a fantastic guest. Stuart Webb is joining me all the way from the UK. How are you doing, Stuart?
Morning, Darren. How are you?
Nice and early morning there in the UK. Yeah. I appreciate you getting up so early and getting dressed and having a coffee.
Yeah, that is the key thing to, well, pretty much every morning, Darren.
I love it. And today, everybody, the topic is From Lab Coats to Boardrooms, a scientist's journey in entrepreneurship with the fantastic Stuart Webb. So Stuart's career trajectory is nothing short of impressive. Starting as a scientist, focusing on persistent viruses, his academic journey spanned across universities like Oxford, London, Birmingham, and Nottingham. In the nascent stages of the internet, Stuart engaged in conversations with Tim Berners-Lee about the budding World Wide Web. This started his journey from academia to entrepreneurship, and he founded and exited 3 businesses. Stuart now dedicates his expertise to assisting companies tackle wicked problems. These involve scenarios demanding sustainable innovation or navigating the complexities of mergers, acquisitions, and digital transformation, where multiple stakeholders are at play. With an eye for increasing productivity, achieving set goals, and realizing dreams, Stuart's impact is clear and was recognized recently when he was asked to be the judge at the Sustainability World Cup. So welcome to the show, mate, and well done.
Thank you very much, Darren. Pleased to be here.
Excellent. And just a little plug for me, as I give everybody a little bit of a quick little intro at the beginning of every episode. I've put together a fantastic 7-day podcast challenge. So if anybody's interested in podcasting and learning more about podcasting, it's a free challenge. You can sign up in the link on the show notes, and you'll get 7 days of incredible content that'll help you start your podcast and also optimize your podcast if you already have one. But enough about me. Stuart, let's take a walk through your background, and I'd love to hear a bit more about your transition from the science world to the business world.
So, yeah, Darren, from a very early age, I mean, literally just single digit, 5, 6, 7, I was always a curious, scientifically minded kid, did all the things that I kept trying to do experiments, even in my early years, with my parents would say, why are you doing something like that? And I'd say, I want to find these things out.
Wow.
So I was always destined to go into it. So I spent time at school, taking all the right subjects to end up in the universities that I did all the degrees up to the sort of the higher research degrees. And it was during this period that I realized that although I was fascinated by this stuff, there was other stuff I wanted to explore, which is why I ended up starting to poke around at one stage, and I found out some of this stuff that was going on at CERN and the development of the World Wide Web. I could learn to exploit this. So one of the things I started to do was exploit some of that within the university, where at the time I was supposed to be doing a research project.
Oh, wow.
And if I could help the university sort of use the internet to teach medical students and things like that, which is one of the things I was interested in.
Amazing.
So I was doing that for a while. I was doing it in a way which was obviously of interest, but at the time was not particularly appreciated by the people that I was working with. And it was them that said, you really need to knuckle down and decide which way you're going to go. And I thought, well, I kind of have. So I just went and said, okay, I'm going to leave. I'm going to try and use some of this stuff I've learned about the internet, learned about the World Wide Web, and I'm going to go and do stuff with it. So I started a business where, because as part of my evenings when I wasn't doing my research, I'd started getting some of the machines that were in use in the hospital to talk to computers. I went out and I started with somebody else, a business in order to connect these machines to these computers, and we sold it. And then I decided that this technology that we'd worked on, we decided we would look into how we could make that into what we call software to help people to schedule their business. We worked on that and it became something that lawyers were interested in because they had things which needed to happen at a particular time and we seemed to know how to do it. So we did that for that. But during the early stage of my career, all of this scientific knowledge, all of this stuff that I trained in for years and years and years, and it really was by this stage years, I thought I don't need it anymore. I don't do things like that. But you don't have to have a structured approach to anything. You just do stuff wildly. You just get out there and do stuff. And I forgot all of this massive training. And it wasn't until I got into my third business, which was the one that I really scaled. And we scaled that up to 600 odd people.
Wow. Oh my God.
I realized I was never going to scale a business unless I applied some of the techniques that I actually had been trained in. And it involved me sort of effectively running experiments on my business. And putting my lab coat back on and taking on board a lot of the sort of training I had and thinking, okay,
love it.
Not making massive changes, because in an experiment, you don't make a lot of changes. You change one thing and you see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So you start with the idea, I want to test something. I want to find out if this is the best way of going forward. And you change one thing and you see if that actually helps or it hinders.
Yep.
So a lot of that training came back during that period of my life as I started realizing that I actually had to re-import all of this stuff that I had thrown away and actually make it work for me. And it was that period that was really revelatory, if you like. I by this stage, I've done a couple of little businesses. But the next one, because I took on board this thinking, I started trying to really apply the processes that I'd always applied when I was doing scientific experiments. When I started thinking like that again, I was able to scale that business. We were up to 600 odd people and millions in revenue. And the reason that I put my success down to that was because we started to take on a scientific approach. And I think business is a lot more like science than people think.
I agree.
Business is not about the wild swings and roundabouts, although there can be ups and downs. It's about being methodical. It's about being really organized. It's about knowing what you're trying to do and not making massive changes because people cannot cope with that. Yeah. So I've just re-imported all of those lessons, re-imported all of that thinking, and it's been successful.
Amazing. Brilliant. And I agree with you. I think that business is very analytical and very scientific, but there's also a lot of room for creativity as well, but within the gates and the realm of structure. I've heard that before when, I don't know, I listen to so many podcasts and all sorts of audiobooks, but I've definitely heard that theory to say that if you're going to change anything, change it one thing at a time. Alex Hormozy, actually. I listen a lot to Alex Hormozy, and he says exactly that. Change one thing at a time, otherwise you'll never know what was working.
That's right. That's right. And people will think that a lot of science is not particularly creative. It is. There's a lot of creativity in science because it's about saying, we know this, but we don't know something else. So how do we go about finding it out? What do we do? So there's an awful lot of things which people go, business and science, very different. They're not. They're very, very similar.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate to have been involved in both.
Yeah, that's amazing. And the more and more I conduct business as well, is I realize how important systems are and processes. And that's also extremely scientific. You've got to have good systems and processes and structures and roadmaps and planning. You don't just get up in the morning and it's not the Wild West.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, Darren, I look back at some of the stuff that I have done and I realized that for a lot of businesses, the thing which stops them is their inability. I kind of talk to a lot of the people that I'm mentoring and working with at the moment. I talk to them about their business, their entrepreneurial business glass ceiling. A lot of the time we come up against this glass ceiling and you watch it, you see a founder, it's suddenly chaotic. There's too much going on. They're unable to work through the problems. It all starts to become frenetic. And I talk to them about the fact that this is what I call the entrepreneurial business glass ceiling. They bump up against it. And the thing which most of the time helps them to break through that into better scaled, larger businesses is their realization that a system is actually going to help, not hinder them. Because a lot of the time they fear that. And by taking it away from them being at the center of business, let me give you an example.
Yeah.
I was working with a guy recently called Richard. Richard, lovely guy, really love. He was enthusiastic. He had so many ideas. It was almost difficult to contain him. But his business was beginning to really stall. And it was because everything went through Richard. Richard was at the center of every decision. Nobody took a decision without Richard.
Yeah.
If a customer needed something, Richard made the decision. If they needed a new product, Richard came up with the product. It was Richard. Well, the problem is Richard only has 24 hours a day and he needed some sleep as well. Absolutely everything was coming through Richard. So I worked with Richard to put in some systems and some processes and for him to learn how to delegate some of this work out, some of the other people working for him. He'd hired some really, really clever people, half of whom he wasn't letting them do the job he'd hired them for.
Yeah.
So we put in processes, systems. I taught him how to delegate, which is something which I learned very early in my journey when I scaled my business. And suddenly some of these blockages that were preventing his business from growing melted away. And then we started working on the fact when he needed to change a process, he didn't just change the entire process. He would just change one step in the process at a time, which meant that if it didn't work out, he could go back and try something else. And that stopped a lot of the chaos in his business. And it started to really take off and it really scaled. And the people that were working for him were suddenly happier. He was a better manager. One of the things that I did with Richard is I sat him down and I wrote him a new job description because I don't think he'd realized he'd moved from being the technician to the manager. And then after the manager, I had to take him through to the next stage and make him the visionary leader and leave his managers to do the managing. So it involved having to take him through a new series of steps for himself. So we wrote a job description, which made him sort of more aware of the fact that he was now managing. And then we wrote a job description a few months later, which said, now you need to start training yourself to become a visionary and leave the management to other people. And it transformed his business over about 2 years. And now he's scaled that business and he's about to exit. He's about to sell that business and take his money and buy a yacht or whatever he's going to do with it. But it's all due to the fact that he was able to sort of understand that this glass ceiling could be broken through if he spent time understanding what his role in the glass ceiling was.
Yeah. And it's something that we all fall into the trap of, particularly when we're solopreneurs and we're building, is that we love control as well. I'm a control freak. We love to do it ourselves. We love to say, I can do it better than anybody else. And as you say, if you hire people, they're only going to start getting frustrated and disgruntled if you don't allow them to do what you hired them to do. So
Absolutely right.
You start delegating, you're actually helping your staff by retaining them as well.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So often we look at these very expensive costs that we've got and we wonder why we're not getting the most out of them. It's largely due to the fact that we're not. I see it so often. I saw it when I was starting my scale business. The people who were fantastically organized, they would get out and they'd organize scout groups in the evening. They'd organize massive events with these scouts. There was somebody else that was an absolutely brilliant bookkeeper for their local church.
Wow.
And I looked around and thought, why are you bringing none of those skills into this business? And it was almost as if they would say, well, that's what I do when I'm at home. But when I come in here, apparently I only do this. It's a tiny bit of my life.
Yeah.
And I kept saying to them, I went, you're good at organising events. I've seen this jamboree that you've organised for the Scouts. And I went, yeah. So I went, do that here. And just take some of those skills and do them here. And they went, well, you wouldn't like it. And I went, I'll tell you what, I'll let you do it. I will actually ask you to just do it. And I won't get in your way because I don't know how to organise a massive event. I'll watch and I'll learn from you. And this was a revelation. They'd go, oh, terrific. I'd love to do that. And suddenly the next thing you're sitting there and thinking, I've learned a lot by watching them. And that's actually part of us as a business leader.
Yep.
The one thing we can do is learn from the people around us. I think it was Mark Zuckerberg that said, when he hires somebody, he thinks, would I want to work for them? Well, yeah, when you're hiring people, look at those skills they've got. Remember that they can bring those to work with you.
Yep.
And for goodness sake, let them use them and learn from them, because no point in hiring somebody if you're not going to let them do everything they're good at.
No, absolutely. They're just going to leave you because they're going to be frustrated and bored and handcuffed. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. Very, very good point. Now, I want to dive into one more thing and expand on what we've discussed from a science background as well. I'd love to know, what do you feel are some of the other abilities, skills, traits that you still bring and use every day that you find valuable in the entrepreneurial world from your scientific background?
So there are two that I'll immediately point out. The first of which is we've already talked a little bit about this, the rigor of thinking through and sort of making incremental changes. But the second is the fact that all scientists stand on the shoulders of giants. And I happily acknowledge that everything that I've ever done or achieved has been largely because of other people and learning from what they've been doing. So no scientist would have been able to make any progress without Galileo and Newton and all the greats that came before us. But in between those, there were people who made small changes that changed our worldview, that allowed us better access to tools, to thinking. And I happily acknowledge and realize that my success has been built upon standing on those shoulders of giants. So I am a great learner. I do an awful lot of trying to, and it's something I was talking to my son, who's 23. He's just really started in his journey. He's joined a company and he's a marketing associate, and he seems to have landed on his feet because the business is giving him lots of opportunities. But I said to him, you're doing it by instinct. You have to spend time looking across the world, looking across what's going on, and picking out and learning in order to get better at things. You can't just keep running on instinct. Set yourself a time each day, and I do it still, now, half an hour a day, when I will sit and I will read and I will try to understand something new that I might see that I can apply.
Wow.
So scientists spend a lot of their time looking around the world, thinking about what is going on and how that might be useful knowledge that I can apply somewhere else. My thing that I would suggest to you, Darren, is spend some time learning, spend some time picking up books, spend some time picking up articles, and take that time out, literally take it out. It's an appointment in my diary with myself so that it doesn't get blocked out by somebody who wants my time.
Yeah.
I spend some time each morning reading and learning.
Yeah.
And trying to understand how that might be some skills, some new thoughts, some new knowledge that I can apply. The other thing I'd say that scientists are constantly pushing the boundaries. No scientist wants to stay within the knowledge of what they've already. We're all curious people, not only because we want to learn, but because we want to actually find out. So in part of that, me reading about other things, I am constantly asking questions. And the reason that asking questions is so important is because we don't know how to ask questions. We're not taught how to ask questions. But one of the best questions I've ever learned to ask was, tell me more about that. It's not actually much of a question. It doesn't have a question mark at the end of it, does it? Yeah. Tell me more about that.
I love it.
But the one thing that I've learned is the only way that I can actually gain better knowledge is not to ask the obvious question or not to ask a question which ends in answer yes, no. I now ask questions which are along the lines of, tell me more about that, because you don't know what you're going to learn.
That's right.
And it's better to actually start. So scientists are very keen to gain as much knowledge as possible. We're all people that are thirsty to learn everything there is to know about a subject, or sometimes outside of our subject. And the only way you can do that is not to shut down the answers to questions. I notice a lot of business people don't ask open-ended questions. They want somebody to affirm or to get them to sort of, they want somebody to just give them a quick
validate
yes.
what they're already doing.
Yeah. And I'm very keen to try and encourage people to realize that actually if you stopped and said, just tell me more about that, you might learn something you didn't know, and that would be really useful to you.
I love it. And thinking while you're talking, it's fascinating that in this day and age, with access to information at scale that we have, isn't that crazy not to do that, not to do the research, not to check, not to listen to other people's opinions, not to ask questions? You're
absolutely right, Darren. Today with social media, and obviously there's a whole load of, we could get into social media and some of the evil impacts of social media, etc. But the fact of the matter is that with social media, we're presented with something and people take it at face value. I nearly always find myself looking at some information that I get from social media and asking the question, right, tell me more, find out where that came from. Because it's only by finding out where it came from that you can actually sit there and go, do you know something? I don't think that is a particularly reliable source of information for that. So I will discard it.
Yep.
And if we spent more time saying, well, hang on a minute, tell me a bit more about that. Where did that come from? How did it get here? Why did it end up in where it? And then you can look at it and go, right, that doesn't feel right. It doesn't actually align with what I have learned from others. I say I do this, I call my learning period each morning when I sit down and I learn things. And you sit there and go, wait a minute, I learned before that red is red. Now you're telling me red is blue. No, that doesn't align. So I'm going to, at this stage, park that, and I'm going to go back to what I already know.
Yep, I love that. And as well, is that because we can stand on the shoulders of giants and greats and all the people who've done this before, and we have access to them now in video form, in audio form, why the hell would we not learn and jump the queue and not go back to square one when they've already gone to square 50? Start from square 50 on. We're crazy.
And, the thing is, what comes from what you've learned, you can always look at it and go, new information, new situation. I now have to change my view.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that a scientist, and, I was fascinated by the pandemic the world all went through not so many years back. And it's partly because that was my field. I was working with human viruses.
Wow.
But the fact of the matter is that politicians would ask the scientists, what do we know? And the answer nearly always was, we're learning. We're gaining new information all the time.
Yeah.
And politicians, business people often don't want somebody to turn around and go, we've learned something new. We've now got to revise our worldview. We've now got to revise the information because new information has come to mind. We have now learned something new. And too often business people will go, no, I don't want to look as if I'm wrong. So we'll just plow on doing what we're doing. I've always been a fan of sort of turning around and saying, okay, new information, new direction.
Well,
new
this
information.
is working, then new approach. Start again, something different.
Yeah. So as I say, some of this stuff that I learned as a young scientist, I didn't apply in my businesses until later than I'd like. But once I applied it, I realized that there are so many things about this that you can say, okay, I am comfortable with that and we'll make use of it. And often the business people that you see who scale and make businesses very successful are the ones that think like this.
Yeah.
There are too many who I see who can make great businesses big or could make great businesses better, but they don't adopt some of this thinking. They don't adopt some of these approaches. And they are slowed and they are hampered and they become more stressed because of it. And I just want to grab each one of them and give them a shake and go, right, let's do this properly because you will be a better, happier, more fulfilled person by just changing the way that you're doing things enough to make a real difference.
Absolutely love that. So interesting. And I suppose as business people, we are a little bit sometimes resistant to change because maybe it means a lot more work or it means we don't want to throw away the last 2 or 3 years of striving and struggle. But that's just part of the process. We have to be able to change.
It's just the way it is.
Yep. Love it. Absolutely fantastic. I love drawing those analogies and those parallels between science and business. Fascinating. But how did you upskill yourself in the business world?
I had some very good mentors. So people who would see me, and it was actually somebody who sat me down one day. He was working in my business. It was a business that we were beginning to grow, but he could see me being frazzled. He could see me looking as if I was never going to do what I needed to do. He actually was a fabulous guy. I wish he was still working with me, but he just basically sat me down. This was a guy who was technically my employee, but he said, can I give you some advice? And he was the one that said, I thought you were some sort of scientist from what I've heard. And I went, yeah, no, absolutely. I got this very impressive degree from this very impressive university. I'm a very clever person. He went, I don't see much of that right at the moment. And I went, what do you mean? And he took me through 2 or 3 things which had happened recently. He went, something here changed and you were deliberately ignoring it and carrying on with what you were doing. And I went, yep, that's what we do in business. And he went, no, we don't. And he turned around and said, when you were a scientist, how much time did you spend trying to learn? And how much time did you put into your own personal development? Pretty much all of it, Dennis. And he was, why aren't you doing that? He really brought me back to that. It was an hour I shall never forget as he sat there and basically said, you are so out of your depth at the moment. You've got to where you are. And I basically didn't turn around and say, well done for managing it. But he turned around and he said, you're never going to get where you need to get. And he just gave me about an hour. And I just, at the end of it, he's away. And I thought, I don't know whether or not I can actually do half of what he's just done. I employed him because he looked like he was a really good sales guy.
Fascinating.
And he turned out, I don't even remember his sales figures now. I can't even tell you whether he ever sold anything. But the one thing he did for me was he completely changed my attitude to what I was doing in my business.
Brilliant.
I should be forever grateful to Dennis for basically taking me on one side and say, stop doing what you're doing and start doing what you used to do because you'll be more successful. And over the course of the next 6 months, I just started to think, how do I learn everything I could possibly learn in order to get better at what I'm doing? So I would sit down with books, articles, magazines, stuff on the internet, read it and absorb it and go, right, that's something that I need to do more of. And it was him that actually said to me, put aside half an hour each day just to learn something new and think, how can I apply it? And he was absolutely right.
Fascinating. I love it. What a great story.
Yeah, he was a lovely guy and deeply grateful to him for the fact that he's took me on one side and stopped me becoming a complete nightmare.
Wow. And then you saw
Sure, I'm still a bit of a nightmare, but I'm not as bad as I would have been.
And you saw the results pretty quickly after that change?
The business was growing, but it actually grew really quickly. It grew so fast at one stage that even I was there thinking, I can't hire people fast enough. We can't actually get enough stuff going on. We were developing new products, some of which were wrong, some of which weren't quite working, but some were being quite successful. And we had a great time. And I credit Dennis with the fact that otherwise I think I'd have been a burnt up, shriveled wreck if I hadn't had him sit down and go, you need to start thinking different.
Yeah. What was the hardest thing to do? Delegate?
Yes. Yeah. Teaching myself to delegate. And it's so simple. I actually developed a process for delegation.
Oh, I love it. Of course you did.
And I thought to myself, I'm going to develop a process because I can do processes. It's an experiment. So I'm going to run an experiment. So I ran an experiment to delegate. And I did this experiment. It didn't work quite right. So I changed something and I ran this experiment and it started to work better. And I thought, okay, I'm going to stick with that. So I developed. And of course, as soon as I developed a process, I turned to the managers who were reporting to me and I went, guys and girls, but we'll just call them guys for sake of sort of a common name here. So guys, this is the process you're going to use to delegate to your people because I've been testing this on you and you've been telling me that it's actually been working better for you. So I now want you to do this to the people that in your teams that report to you. And every single one of them turned around and went, but what works for you won't work for us. I went, no, that's the point of this process. The process that I've developed, it's only 4 steps. And these 4 steps have worked for you. I've tested them. I've got the evidence that it's working because we can see that. I now want you to do this. So effectively, I then started saying to them, every 2 weeks, I used to meet with them. I go, right, tell me how your process of delegation is going. What are you learning? How are you applying it? And it would be a structured thing. I would have a structured meeting with them with a structured process. Suddenly all these things started to work.
Amazing. Can you break down that process really briefly?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the delegation process looks like this. 1, you decide what it is that you can move off to somebody else that you've got a confidence that they'll be able to do. So you look around the people that work for you and go, okay, I think they're the person to do it. The second step is you ask them. You start off by saying exactly like this. Hey, Darren, I really need some help from you. Could you take on a task for me? You wait for a yes, because there's no point in then just blasting it out. You have to get them to acknowledge that they're listening.
Yeah.
And I always make that step at the beginning because for me, I've noticed that if I just start telling them about the task, they've got something else going on in their head. So I've now warned them. I've said, basically, I'm needing you to focus. Okay, This is the task. This is the 3rd step. This is the task I need you to do. This is what the result is when we've done it. This is the process. This is how I do it. And this is how I tell if it's done. What I call the quality standard.
Yep.
And this is how I know it's done. Right. Now, because this is the first time I've asked you to do this, Darren, I want you to do this in a small step. And I just want you to get as far as this step here in this delegation before you tell me where you are and how you've got on with it.
Okay.
And that's the 4th bit of this, which is I will now tell you I will need a reporting mechanism back from you to let me know how you're getting on and any issues you've got going on.
Pretty simple.
And then as we work through that present, and remember, work is never done until it's reported, because if you've done it, but you've not told anybody you've done it, that's useless to the rest of the organization.
That's right.
So I go through that process and I get them to do it. And after I've been this 3, we do this 4th step a number of times. You've got as far as this, great. You've let me know it's going well. Go to the next step, until it's finished. And they go, right, next time round, Only tell me about it when you get halfway. And then third time around, tell me about it when you're finished. And that's the last thing. Tell me about it when you're finished. And I actually delegate things like that every time. It is always through that process. It always involves explaining it, explaining how we know it's done, and basically saying that we need to report on it. And I do set, when I first do these, really short deadlines. It's not sort of go away and do it and tell me about it, in a month's time, because if it's a report that's going to take you a month to produce, I don't want to know about it just before you produce it and it's all gone wrong, because then I can't do anything about it.
That's right.
So I set really short deadlines. And that's a process I tested. I tested that. It worked.
Amazing.
I now rolled it out to my managers. My managers did it. I've now taught it to thousands of managers, and every single one of them has said it's really helpful. I didn't know how to do this, and I didn't realize I could do it. And now I've got a process and a way of doing it. I do it to everybody.
Love it. And obviously you start with smaller projects, and then as you get more trust, you increase the size of the project and the duration of the project.
Because you're able to get the report back, because you're able to use tell me how far you've got and let me know whether or not there are any problems. You can start with some big stuff. You can actually put some really big things out there. But because you've got a way of getting them to come back to you and let you know how things are going, you can actually correct before. So you can delegate some really big stuff. But you can set some tight deadlines. You can explore ways of getting information back. And that for me is the other thing that I taught my managers, which is you've got to actually talk about some of this stuff. You've actually got the report back. Can't be just necessarily an email. It can be an email, but you've got to get you've got to get the more information, which only comes from being able to say, tell me about it, rather than the closed-ended, give me this status, because there's not enough information there.
I love that. And the other thing I love about that question, tell me more about that, is you're not directing the conversation. You're allowing them to come back with whatever it is that's on their mind or whatever it is that they need to express. You're not putting gates on whatever the conversation is going to be. Tell me about it. Could be anything.
The fact of the matter is, too often we close that down because it makes us uncomfortable to get information or to learn something we didn't know. Get comfortable with realizing you don't know everything is the best advice I can give to any young business entrepreneur nowadays. Be comfortable with not knowing, because actually in the not knowing, you're going to get better at what you do need to know, but you don't yet. And just get comfortable with not knowing.
And be humble enough to admit it as well.
We don't like to be in the zone of uncertainty, as it were. We like to be constantly knowing things. I'm very struck by a story I was told recently. One of the guys that I'm working with, who's building a business at the moment, I'm thinking about that. He told me this story. He'd hired this young lady. I don't know if this is common to ladies. I apologize if it's not, but he hired this young lady, and she had put in a word into a document which she'd misspelled. And he actually suggested to her that she change the spelling. And she went, no, this is the way I spell it. And he sat down and he said, but the dictionary spells it like this. To which her answer was, I don't care about the dictionary. This is my truth.
I love it.
And he had to explain to her that the world didn't work like that. And certainly in his business, we didn't do stuff we thought was our truth. We did stuff that according to certain things. She was not comfortable with this idea. She said, I like my worldview. I like it the way it is. This is the way I do it. I want everybody else to just accept it. No, it just doesn't work like that. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Love it.
It is a necessity.
Sensational, Stuart. I love it. What a fantastic theme and a great conversation. I just want to give you a bit of an opportunity to tell us more about what you do and how people can find you and work with you.
So I help, as we talked about there, Darren, I'm helping business owners build and grow their businesses. So I work with people who are trying to get funding for their business so it scales, put in place those processes they need to get leads and to convert those leads into customers more conveniently. And I help them through a company that I call The Complete Approach. And it's www.the-complete-approach.com. You can find me there. I'm all over the social media. I've had a podcast on which one Darren Saul
You've got your podcast, which is fantastic. Tell us a bit more about your podcast.
It's called It's Not Rocket Science, 5 questions over coffee. And it's literally that. It's a really great opportunity to have a conversation. I ask you 5 questions, very much like the way you've done today with me, Darren. The start of the show is you. This is not a podcast about me. It's a podcast which I run in order to meet interesting people. So if you'd like to check that out, it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the podcast places. And you can find some really interesting people on there. Darren's been on I've had people like Steve Sims from the United States with some great advice. And it's a really great way, once again, learning new things, learning new information, understanding better ways of doing things by listening to some really fascinating people.
Love it. And that great question. Tell me more about that. That's fantastic. Everybody remember that one. But Stuart, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've had such an interesting conversation. I think it's been a fantastic theme. I've learned a lot, and I'm definitely urge people to reach out to you and check out your podcast as well. So I'm going to put all the links in the show notes, so everybody check those out. But I just want to say thank you so much for giving us your time this morning, and really enjoyed that.
Darren, it's been a real pleasure. Real great to see you again.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me on.
I always like to leave the guest with the last word as well. So is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with?
Go out there, learn something new today, put it into practice.
Fantastic. Love it. Well, there you have it. Stuart Webb, all the way from the UK. Really appreciate it, mate. Everybody have a great day. Have a great weekend. And we'll see you very soon for our next episode of Playing with Perspective, the Suspended Animation Podcast. Bye for now. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks again for joining me for another episode of Playing with Perspective, the Suspended Animation Podcast. If you would like to join me as a guest on the show, I would be delighted to collaborate. Just reach out via www.suspendedanimation.com.au. Also, remember to click on the link in the show notes for loads of great podcasting resources, webinars, courses, and opportunities to help you on your podcast journey. Many of them free. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.